Hello, welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us, if it's your first time rocking with this little bite piece of the internet where me, Yinka, likes to chat about crime. If you like my content, the videos that I painstakingly research and bring to you each week, then make sure that you drop me a cheeky subscribe, a little comment, as long as I don't accidentally turn the comments off again, sorry about that last week, and all of that stuff there. Today we're not going to do any type of like preamble or anything. I'm just gonna get straight into it, and welcome to the anniversary, my true crime series. Let's talk about a case, shall we? We're keeping it in the UK today and taking it back to this week in 2007. Sophie Lancaster had been in a coma for 13 days. She had been attacked while she was walking through a park in Lancashire with her boyfriend Robert. She was beaten so severely that she never woke up from her coma, and she died on August 24th, 2007. She was only 20 years old when she died, and she was born in November of 1986. Now, growing up, she didn't have a huge amount of friends. Her mum described her as an introvert. She kept herself to herself, but when she did come into her own, she found a home amongst the goth community. Her and her mates were really into heavy metal music, and she found friends who dressed similarly. They liked to express themselves with their makeup, with their hair, with their clothing. They would go to gigs together, and this is where she met Rob. They were both students. Rob was studying art, and they lived together in a small flat. And our story doesn't actually begin on the day that Sophie died on August 24th. It actually starts 13 days before, on the 11th, and that started as a normal day for the couple. They spent the day at their friend's house. They had a few drinks, they were hanging out, but it was nothing too heavy. They weren't drunk, and it was around 11:45 p.m. that Sophie and Rob left their friend's house and began walking home. They stopped at a garage to get some cigarettes, and it was here that they bumped into a group of young girls. Now, the girls were strangers. They were a group of teenagers, but they were really intrigued by what the couple was wearing, and the conversation between this group of girls and Sophie and Rob actually went really well. Sophie and Rob agreed to walk with them for a little bit. They hung out with them for a little bit at the entrance of Stubby Lee Park. It was around 1 a.m. that the couple decided to set off once again and actually start to make the journey home. And this time, a group of teenage boys, 5 of them, started hurling abuse at the couple. They were shouting insults at them because of their appearance, their piercings, their hair, their clothing, and so on. I read somewhere that it was mainly aimed at Rob, but neither he nor Sophie rose to the abuse. The boys then took it one step further, and they approached the couple. They surrounded them and they physically attacked Rob. They rained down blows on him, mostly at his head, and Rob was knocked out unconscious. Sophie was just there, helpless, screaming and begging the teenagers to stop. The boys walked away, leaving Sophie cradling a badly beaten Rob. But it wasn't over there. Some of the boys returned, and this time it was to attack Sophie. They beat her with their hands, with their fists, and then they also began jumping, stamping and kicking her head. The boys fled the scene and they left the couple for dead. Paramedics arrived on the scene, but Sophie and Rob were beaten so badly and they were so bruised that they actually couldn't tell if they were male or female at first. Robert had his ID on him when the police and when the paramedics checked, so it was pretty easy to identify him, but they didn't know who Sophie was. It was only when they got in contact with Robert's family that they learned her identity, and Sophie's family were finally contacted. Sophie's mum, Sylvia, found a police card on her doorstep telling her to get in contact with the police because she went out in the morning, she left her phone at home, and then she came back to this. Her and her son Adam, Sophie's brother, rushed to the hospital to see Sophie, but she was unrecognisable. Her hair had been pulled out in parts where her scalp was showing, and there were actual shoe prints on Sophie's face. Rob's injuries were equally as awful on the surface, and they found bleeding on his brain due to the force of the kicks to his head. The police began pretty quickly to speak to potential witnesses. They tried to speak to anyone and everyone who was known to be around the park or in the vicinity of the park on the evening in question. Stubby Lee Park, the area that it happened, was a local hangout spot for teenagers, so police had a pretty good idea. They brought in junior officers to talk to the young young people. And this town where it happened, the town of Bacup, was a sleepy one. Violent crime really wasn't common there, and people were scared because it seemed, and I think it's safe to say, that Sophie and Rob, they were attacked for nothing more than being different. That sent waves of fear through their community, through the goth community, and through anyone who doesn't just conform to the regular schmegler. The junior officers began to make progress pretty quickly with the young people they were questioning. 5 names began surfacing, and I've got to give it to the police on this one. They got to work pretty fast, and pretty soon 3 of the boys were taken into the police station for questioning, and then 2 of the boys, upon hearing that news, handed themselves in. Joseph Holm, who was 17, and his little brother Danny Mallet, who was 17, Ryan Herbert, who was 16, and Brendan Harris, who was only 15 at the time of this attack. And everyone apart from the brothers, Joseph and Danny, denied even being the park. But even Joseph and Danny, they weren't talking straight. They were doing that thing where you admit a teeny tiny bit of something, but not the whole truth. So it was like, yeah, we were there and I hit the guy once, but I wasn't the one who kicked him, or no, I didn't touch the girl. And it turned out for some of this gang as well, it wasn't their first interaction with the police. Ryan and Brendan the 15-year-old, had a history of violence. They had been involved with another assault where they had kicked and punched someone to the ground. Sounds familiar. And it wasn't their first rodeo, to be honest. And the boys, all of them, were charged for the attack on Robert. Through the half confession and the witness statements that were procured by the junior officers, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge for the attack on Sophie. 3 of the boys were released on bail, everyone apart from good old Ryan and Brandon, and that's because of their previous violent histories. And meanwhile at the hospital, Robert and Sophie were still unconscious. Robert seemed to be getting better. He showed signs of getting better, but the same just couldn't be said for Sophie. Doctors told her family that if she woke up, and there was a very big if, that she was likely to be brain damaged. Now, forensic investigators got to work on the boys' homes and they confiscated the clothing they were wearing the night of the attack. Now, the research that I've done on this doesn't make it crystal clear, but from what I've seen, I think all 5 of the suspects had Rob's blood on their clothing, and only Ryan had Sophie's blood on his clothing, and they were all charged further with the assault on Sophie. Sophie went to a brain scan at the hospital and the results were the worst. There was no brain activity and her life support machine was switched off, and she died, like I told you at the top of this episode, on August the 24th, 2007. So this was now a murder investigation. The boys were questioned again. Some of them started to speak, some of them being Brendan, the 15-year-old. He told police that while he did attack Robert, he didn't touch Sophie, but he knew who did. He said that it was Ryan who attacked Sophie. Ryan was the one that was linked to Sophie. There was blood on his trainers and on the inside of the trousers that he was wearing on the night of the attack. And this indicated that he was at least one of the people who was stamping on Sophie. While he was on remand, Ryan, being a kid and potentially not being the cleverest child in the classroom, spoke to his mum on the phone, and this call was bugged. His mum told him not to worry, that if he wasn't involved in the attack on Sophie, he had nothing to worry about, and he told her that he was. He said that he was involved in Sophie's murder. So the police also bugged the police van, and they listened to Ryan and Brendan as they were being shuttled to and from interviews and to court and stuff, and these boys were talking. They were talking in the back of this van, and Ryan said that he kicked her head like a football. All the boys were charged with murder, all 5 of them, under the joint enterprise law. Just a little caveat in case you're not familiar with joint enterprise, and this is what it means here in the UK. Joint enterprise is basically a form of secondary liability. It's when a person who agrees to commit a crime with another person becomes liable for all of the criminal acts committed by the other person. So in this argument, it would be the 3 boys who agree to attack Robert become liable for the total attacks, including the one on Sophie, because they agreed to commit the attack on Robert. Now, a trial date was set and the defence wanted the murder charge on Ryan to be downgraded to manslaughter because they said that he was autistic. And not only was he not, just to lie, and just because you're autistic doesn't mean by any way, shape or form that you are more likely to commit an act such as this. But anyway, that was thrown out. In 2008, the boys pled guilty to assault, but they all pled not guilty to Sophie's murder. However, on the first day of the murder trial, Ryan switched it up and he pled guilty. This meant that Danny, Joseph and the other Danny were off the hook for murder. The charges were dropped because the fact that Ryan had pled guilty meant that the evidence in the murder case for the other 3 boys was diluted. There wasn't enough to convict them. There was really only enough to convict Ryan and Brendan. Brendan was sentenced to 18 years and Ryan was sentenced to 16. The other 3 were given sentences of like 4 to 5 years for their role in the GBH. All of the boys appealed their sentences because they all thought that it was a bit too harsh, the years that they had been given by the British justice system, and Ryan actually got 9 months shaved off of his sentence. And there you have it, the story of Sophie Lancaster and the horrific assault turned murder that happened here in the UK in 2007. Something that I wanted to add at the end of this video actually was something about Sophie's mum, Sylvia. Now, she set up a foundation called the Sophie Lancaster Foundation, and I've linked their website in the description for this video. They do fundraising, they hold campaigns and events, and their aim is to educate on hate crime. It is such a lovely charity, so if you get a second, like, just check it out and have a look at it. It's designed to, you know, just help people who identify differently, to be a hub, to be a community and a place that is safe for people. Yeah, so make sure you check that out and have a look at it, and thank you for watching. I'll be back next week with another dose of true crime, and if you've got this far, you might as well follow my true crime Instagram. I'm going to put a link in the description. You get daily true crime updates daily over there, and I'll see you next week. So have a good one, stay safe, and see you later.